That is the default technology choice going forward. Gas-fired generation is the critical option in terms of dispatchable power. If you look down the road in the United States, it's kind of a binary choice. You're either going to be putting in a gas turbine with something, or something a similar cycle, or a renewable.
When you look at natural gas consumption and growth, really almost over the last 2 decades, the bulk of that growth has been for electric power generation. With that, we'll say that electric power, it looks like it's about 27 BCFD, which is twice what it was in 2000. Everything else is either flat or lower. And so, understandably, that's, I guess, why natural gas industry is very interested in power.
We're also seeing quite a bit of uptick in terms of pairing energy storage with natural gas reciprocating engines over in the UK, as the general trend has been coal plants sort of being decommissioned and natural gas being obviously much more flexible and a much more reliable, resilient asset base. So we see that coming to the US and to some extent, but certainly the UK is seeing that today actively and anticipate the US moving in that direction.
LNG exporters can sell LNG to Europe for $20 equivalent MMBTU, and they can net back $15 here in the Gulf Coast. What's going to keep our prices? What's going to keep the domestic industry from paying up to $15 what's going to keep our prices from moving up to $15 based on world economics as opposed to the NYMEX forward curve, which might be at $3 or $4. A couple weeks ago, when it was 19 degrees here in Houston, there was kind of a shortfall for natural gas, and the spot prices for that time frame were roughly equivalent to what the netback prices were at Sabine. They got up to about $7, $8, which you add on their shipping costs, gets you about $12 to Japan and China, which is the current price of methane in those areas.
The unsubsidized cost of solar, the unsubsidized cost of wind, and the cost of gas combined cycle is very comparable.
And so again, what's important for industrials? We need security of supply. We need to have access to supply, and we need to have access to competitive markets. And the best way for an industrial to manage these needs is really your fuel supply plan. Any industrial facility has a fuel supply plan that needs to take in different considerations. First consideration is, well, you want to run continuously.
The median price for solar plus energy storage, by the way, was $36 a megawatt hour. Okay, so when people look at wind and they look at solar and they go, okay, yeah, but all right, so combined cycle, that's in the $40 range, but we get capacity. We get the ability to have it, serve the needs when somebody needs it, when the industrial customers who are really, really concerned about, when they're running, they really want to be running, right? We can't use those arguments anymore, because now when solar and storage are being added to the grid, the developers and the cost of the technology is coming down to come up with some pricing that's incredibly competitive relative to CCGTs.
You don't want your reliability to be dependent upon the reliability of your upstream pipeline. So the best way to hedge that risk is to have two pipelines supplying your facility. As far as competitive prices go, my experience with this is you get your best prices if you have three pipelines in your facility. Mexico export capacity and Cheniere with their capacities that they've contracted for, they've done a great job with their fuel supply plans in order to push gas out basically out of the country. They've secured transportation. They've gotten fuel supply commitments from producers. They've tied up a lot of supply and a lot of capacity to move that gas offshore. Well, what about the current industrial consumers? Is there going to be enough capacity for us moving ahead? I sure hope so. Everybody thinks there will be, but I'm not sure. Well, time will tell. I'm also concerned about prices. What kind of prices are we going to pay? On a peak day, prices were really determined by the NYMEX forward curve and your storage economics. But now today, we have a whole new paradigm with the exports. Is the pricing going to a new factor? Is it going to be the netbacks of the worldwide LNG prices back to the U.S.?
Well, you see coal dramatically reducing in terms of the amount of generation that it serves, with the growth again being picked up by natural gas and renewables. Coal is challenged. Most of the coal fleet is really old. A lot of it is younger than I am, actually, but that means it's old in power plant world. And it's not efficient. What we're finding is that the economics of coal, from a dispatch perspective, it's not even worth it to turn it on in many cases.
Some of the challenges, highlight just briefly, I want to save some time for the panel discussion. In the oil and gas space, power quality is absolute top problem. Folks in the oil and gas space, particularly on drilling, tend to run more engines than they necessarily need to. Our initial stage, or our initial uptake on the oil and gas land drilling side was pairing with diesel gen sets that were trying to run more natural gas. We enabled the gen sets to effectively run, instead of running 3 engines all the time, they run one 100% of the time, and most of the rest of the time on 2 engines. So enabling that more, again, efficient play.
And that has increased significantly. It has taken a ton of share away from coal, which used to be about 50% of generation. Nuclear has stayed kind of flat, and we also see growth in renewables as well. Most new additions on the grid over the last few years have actually been in renewable generation capacity. So about 40% of the capacity in gigawatts that was added to the grid last year was actually in solar. And then when you add wind, I mean, it's very much the bulk of the capacity additions. So it's not saying that there isn't any room for gas. There is room for gas, but it's competing heavily with renewables for the new increment. And then if you remember, going back to the first slide, demand for electricity is kind of flat. So what we're doing, what we're waiting for in the power industry is for some of those old coal plants and some of the really old gas plants that are really inefficient in using not the latest technology. At some point, they need to be replaced with things that are a lot more beneficial to customers and that fit in much better with the grid these days.
We have, like the Texas Railroad Commission, they have gas curtailment rules that were written in the 70s. That was even before transportation was thought of, open access transportation, much less LNG or exports to Mexico. And so the curtailment rules, I'm sure, need to be addressed. Because on a peak day, who's going to? We'd prefer to have the gas stay here in the U.S. for our domestic industry, as opposed to shutting down plants here so we can fuel other plants around the world, just because they have gas. It's kind of a protectionist message, but it's something I think we're going to be talking about over the next 5 years.
One of the biggest shifts in the power industry has been the engaged consumer. And I don't mean the tree hugger. I mean Google, right? Google just announced that they have reached their goal of 100% of the electricity they purchase worldwide is from renewables. Natural gas can play a huge role in that. but it's also competing with a host of other technologies, such as demand response at the customer level, and then also this new form of peaking called energy storage, which is finally getting to a point where battery storage is cost effective on the grid.
FlexGen is in the business of developing hybrid power systems. So in a nutshell, very similar to what you have in a hybrid vehicle, what we do is take some sort of energy storage. It can either be ultracapacitors or some level of battery technology. We're agnostic to the actual storage. Take power electronics and then pair it with some very capable software systems either overlaid within the power electronics or over the overarching platform to enable an asset to be more flexible, as Nisha was talking about being so critical, particularly on the natural gas side.
Such as electric vehicles is really being looked at by the industry as kind of a hope that electricity demand can really grow significantly.
And instead of waiting for the grid to become stronger, they can fix the problem, in this case, again, as an additional asset from the Schlumberger side. I did mention also that we're involved in the solar side of things, adding batteries to do that load shifting and add a more flexible solar asset. Did talk about the microgrid space, have more than 100 of those systems currently deployed, and then flexible generation in the UK market, again, specifically today. We've seen a lot of quote volume go out the door, but we do not have any grid scale sort of fast start capable assets here in the US, again, because I don't think the ISO markets are supporting it at this point.